Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Ridley from State Promotions and welcome to our Round 4 Malaysia in Market webinar. It's great to have you join us. As you may be aware, the Department for Trade and Investment is delivering these webinars to ensure you, our local industry, is receiving the latest and most reliable information on how COVID-19 is impacting market conditions. We've been really pleased with the success of these webinars, with a tune-in rate of over 1,200 attendees, as well as a large number of hits to our archived recordings located on our website. Given Malaysia is South Australia's second largest goods export destination in the world, this should be a really interesting session. So a little bit about our presenters who we'll be chatting to today about what's happening in Malaysia. First up, we'll hear from our own South Australia Senior Business Development Manager in Malaysia, Adil Akbar. Adil's primary role is to support South Australian businesses to export and expand their presence in Malaysia across multiple sectors, including agribusiness, food and beverage, international education, high tech, and health and medical industries. Following Adil, we have Dinesh Nambiar, chairman of the Malaysia-Australia Business Council, which of course is the leading voice of Malaysia and Australian business. Dinesh will share his insights on the impact of COVID-19, its effect on the local economy and different industries in Malaysia. And lastly, we'll hear from Chau, President of AusCham ASEAN, who will also present valuable insights on the current situation in Malaysia. A few little housekeeping tips before we get started. Apologies, you've probably heard this previously, time and time again. This session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our Department for Trade and Investment's website for future reference. We welcome questions. Just submit through the Q&A field on the right-hand side of your screen, but ensure they're directed to all panelists so that we can see them. If we run out of time and we haven't got to your question, I'll contact you personally and connect you to the most appropriate departmental representative. And lastly, at the end of the session, please take the time to complete our short 10-second poll. So let's get started. Hello, Adil. It's really good to see you again.
Actually, it's nice to be joining the session again and to share about Malaysia to our SA businesses. So today is 3rd of June and Malaysia is still currently under a partial lockdown, although a lot of the sectors of economy has reopened. So just a bit overview about my presentation. I'll give an current updates on the impacts of COVID-19 to the local industry, as well as to the consumers. I'll do it via giving the current market conditions, the challenges in the market trends, some pointers for the Malaysian market, and just contact details on who you can reach out for assistance. Next, please. So Malaysia, like other countries in the wider ASEAN region, has not been spared from COVID-19 destructive effects. Hence, the government has introduced a movement control order, which is a partial lockdown from the 18th of March until the 3rd of May. And subsequently, they have renamed it into a conditional movement control order from the 4th of May until the 9th of June. So we are looking forward whether there's going to be further extensions or not beyond the 9th of June. However, the situation looks good because current number of cases are currently just about mostly double digits, although it fluctuates a bit between a low double digits to mid and sometimes high due to sometimes imported cases or migrant workers cases. Nevertheless, the local transmission amongst the local population in Malaysia remains quite constructive right now, and we are looking forward to that numbers. Total number of recoveries is about 82% of all positive cases. This is as of yesterday. And as I mentioned earlier, since May 12, the double-digit number has been quite consistent. So we expect that Q2, the economic impact is going to be a contraction, and we're hoping that we can see a rebound by 2021, Q1 2021. Malaysia was doing quite not too bad in the Q1 this year, where they still managed to register 0.7% of growth. So that was a bit some analyst consensus, which has expected negative growth. So that was quite good. Most sectors are now allowed to open, subject to strict SOPs, standard operating procedures by the government. The government has also mentioned that they're going to unveil another new economic stimulus plan by the end of this week with some specific focus on the public-private partnerships. As of mid of May, just before the festivities season, Hari Raya over here, there were about 67% of the labor force have started returning to work. However, that figures includes those who are working from home. So just for example, today I'm still continue working from home, but we are doing based on a rotation basis where tomorrow I can start go to office to work. Political situation remains a bit fluid over here and unstable. Both federal and state governments are still in unstable situation where even as of last month, there was a change of state government. Last month was the state government of Kedah, which has changed hands. The ruling coalition, based from the last parliamentary sitting, based on this where they seated in the parliament, seems to be only having majority of 2. This is the lowest in the country's history. Next, please. So, based on the current market conditions, the government has created a 6-phase plan where we are currently moving into restart, and we are hoping to see more rules to be relaxed, provided there's continued low new local transmission cases until the 9th of June. Sectors remains closed includes like kindergartens and schools, public universities, although there's exemptions for students undertaking research works that they can go to the campus. Gyms, saloons, indoor and stadium sports are still closed, as well as religious activities, including prayers at mosques, churches, and so on. There's SOPs that has been set by the government, but in general, it includes screening temperatures of anyone that enters the premise, sanitization and disinfection process, as well as, of course, social distancing within the premise. For retails, they would need to record details of names and telephones, as well as dates of customers or guest visits. So there's several specific industry updates I would like to share. So manufacturing has showed signs of approaching stabilization midway through the second quarter. So we hope to see further improvement in this. In the agribusiness and F&B sector, the Ministry of Health is going to come out with more new guidelines to start reopen open air markets again. Next, please. For the retail sector, a number of grade A and B malls within Kuala Lumpur especially have resumed full operations. Although in terms of footfall traffic, it hasn't reached yet to pre-COVID or lockdown situation. Personally, whenever you go into the malls now, you will be going through temperature screening at the main entrance. And then when you want to go to each of the retail stores, you're going to go through it again. States like KL, the city capital, as well as Selangor have also introduced apps with a QR code that will help consumers also to register their details over there. Telecommunication sector, just recently earlier this week, the government has announced awarding of 5 new spectrum bands to 5 Malaysian telcos. This will help towards 5G, which the government has planned to implement it towards the end of this year, or we foresee there's a delay towards early next year. Defense sector, the Royal Malaysian Air Force has set up a new squadron for unmanned aircraft vehicles. So that's something new to look forward for. In the education sector, childcare center are now allowed to open, child daycare. Kindergarten, the government mentioned they are looking at reopening it starting from the 1st of July, subject to finalizing the SOPs. For the school sector, the governments are working towards reopening it. However, they will give us about 2 weeks notice before any schools are reopened. For the healthcare sector, the medical device and ventilators continue to gain importance in the country, and the Ministry of Health will introduce new regulations in force from the 1st of July. E-commerce is always getting more prominence over here, and we can see there's a lot of tractions locally. Hence, the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs is looking to improve the legal regulations around this area as well. Next, please. So what are the market challenges? I will go through all, but the key ones would be supply chains like air freight has been quite a challenge to this market. as well as seaport congestion issues initially as well during MCO period. However, most of these are now resolved. Um, although we do foresee like currently connection from South Australia to Malaysia, there's no direct air freight yet. It's via Singapore only currently. Imported products continue to increase the cost due to air freight increase in cost, as well as due to some reduction in purchase by consumers in the market as well. However, we are concerned and observing this closely because of the price sensitive nature of the market. There's been some labeling requirements issue that has been raised by some of the importers over here, and we are working with the Federal Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment to solve this matter, the Malaysian government. Businesses are looking to do two things, basically to create detailed plan to return back to business as usual, although under a new normal situation, as well as to see how they can do a pandemic-proof operations moving forward using digital capabilities. Uh, Another key challenge in the market is that recently, despite the low new positive numbers amongst the local Malaysian population, migrant workers has been infected quite badly as well with COVID-19, especially some depot immigration areas, as well as a few construction sites. So we are observing this closely as well. Next, please. So this slide is I've taken from Austrade KL presentation earlier. It's just to show on how average household expenditure has reduced before as well as during MCO, as you can see the differences. Next, please. So in terms of market trends, I've shared earlier as well in terms of consumers' behavior. Consumers will now have depressed incomes, and there's going to be more concerns on their financial health, as well as, of course, their prioritizing on their physical health and home care. So we are hoping to see some consumption stabilizing in quarter 3, as well as recovery at the earliest from quarter 4 this year. Um, Consumers, because of the situation that they had to be under partial lockdown period, most of them had to order food online and depends on food deliveries, as they were worried about their situation by going to the stores to purchase the food. So hence we are looking at more trends in this area. Restaurants are also looking at trends that customers would like to see how their purchase being handled in the hygienic way. So that's a key concern. As I mentioned earlier, because of the depressed incomes, there's going to be weakening purchase power of consumers. So you may want to consider to reduce your packages or packing to smaller size when you export to Malaysia. There's cybersecurity is a concern over here as well. There's a increase of cases on cybersecurity incidents over here. Hence, there might be some opportunities for enterprise solutions or business enabling cybersecurity providers. E-commerce, as I mentioned earlier, is definitely a market trend over here, and I believe in the wider ASEAN and Asia Pac as well. With schools shuttered, e-learning platforms would be the way to go. Next, please. So some quick pointers for the Malaysian market. Sometimes it's best to look for partners rather than buyers over here. So however, be prepared when you look for Malaysian companies. Make sure you have clear objectives, as well as what kind of criteria that you're looking for in a partner. And make sure you know what kind of business model operations that you would like to offer to them. Be flexible. Partners generally prefer multiple meetings in this market. Although it might not be possible in the near term, please reach out to us and we can help to assist to create virtual meetings for you. You have to be consistent, as well as make sure you follow up closely in this market as well. Malaysia tend to sometimes not to say no, and you will have to see their non-verbal cues as well in this market. But from your side, please say no when needed. Please know that there's a MAFTA, which is the Malaysia-Australia Free Trade Agreement. Familiarize with it. Most of the Australian products are tariff-free, and you may want to know that there's no need to supply a certificate of origin in this market. So please research on how your products may need to be regulated in Malaysia, and please reach out to us for assistance and networking opportunities. Next, please. So these are just some contact details that you can take. Feel free to take a picture on this. Before I end my presentation, I just would like to say thanks again to Dinesh, Nambiar, as well as Chau for joining us in this presentation, and we look forward to their presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be speaking today at the Global In-Market Update, this webinar this afternoon. Thank you, Ashley, for the introduction. Thank you, Adil. Some of the points I will cover we duplicate with what Adil touched. So I will move quickly through that and focus on some of the issues affecting industry and talk about the opportunities that we see in the industry here, and also a little bit about what we can do at MABC for you. There is also a little bit about what the Malaysian Industrial Development Authority can do for investors coming into Malaysia in my pack. So with that, I just move on to the next slide, which actually has been covered largely in the previous presentation by Adil, which was that, you know, the key statistics we've had as of the end of May, just under 8,000 cases, about 80% recovery rate, 1.5% fatality rate, and you can see from the chart that, you know, it hit a peak in the 25th, 26th May period, and the more recent numbers, as was stated in the previous presentation, have been largely the foreign workers, very similar situation to Singapore. And I'll touch on foreign workers in my presentation because they're a significant part of the workforce in Malaysia. Just one other thing, when we talk about the total number of cases, is obviously that's related to number of the testing. We actually are very similar to Australia in terms of numbers, although Australia's population is just over 25 million compares to 32 million in Malaysia, but testing in Australia is, I think, more than double the rate per 1,000 compared to Malaysia. On the next slide, there is some how we fared in terms of containment measures, and this is an external assessment by the Oxford Latavnik School of Government, and out of 117 countries that were surveyed or studied, Malaysia rated quite a respectable 18th in terms of measures put in place and the way government has gone about it. So the general, you know, the implementation of the measures, which is on the next page, which is an overview of the major events. There's I'll cover in this, you know, the time frame and what was done over a period of time. So we had, if you recall, the first cases of what was then thought to be pneumonia in Wuhan sometime at the end of December. Malaysians Health Ministry confirmed the first case on January the 25th. Now we had our first, and this is also another important point to talk about, stimulus packages as we talk about the economy. We had our first stimulus package actually on February the 27th, which was before our lockdown of the movement control order. And what actually drove that was really a was to re-stimulate the economy for a number of other reasons related to oil prices, related to general economic performance, and that was a stimulus package put in place by the Prime Minister at the time, Mahathir. As Adil said, there's been some instability politically here, and between then and March the 18th, we saw a change of government. We had a new Prime Minister. The situation with COVID began to escalate, and on May 18th, the government put in place a 14-day movement control order, which was effectively a lockdown. Industries and businesses stopped operations, restaurants, schools, everything came to a standstill. People had to not go out of their homes, and if they did, was to buy emergency supplies. Only certain essential services were kept open. So these movement control orders, there were actually 4 extensions of them. The first one was 14 days. Then there was an extension of that, which went to the 14th of April. That was extended to the 28th of April. And then a further extension to the 12th of May. And now we have what's called a conditional movement control order, which allows a large part of businesses to operate, with certain exceptions, as Adil mentioned. Schools are not yet open, but most businesses are operating, and there is quite a bit of freedom to move around within the state, but you cannot move interstate, and that will expire on the 9th of May. Meanwhile, during this period, a number of other things happened. Oil prices plunged, and Malaysia oil is a significant contributor to our GDP. We also had an additional two extensions of the economic package, a 10 billion ringgit extension, and then a further 250 billion, which I will touch on. So there have been these 3 economic packages to revive the economy. We then go on to what it's meant for businesses in Malaysia. So on the next slide, we have a survey which was done by the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, together with a number of business houses and newspapers. And the first part of this survey is to assess the cash buffer of consumers, because we had this period of time where people either had reduced salaries or, in some cases, particularly the daily employed, no salaries. And it was to understand what it was doing economically. And as you will see from this, the self-employed, more than something like 70%, nearly over 2/3 of the self-employed, really had no more than 4 weeks cash buffer, which is pretty alarming. Employers, and a large part of these employees, Malaysia's economy is built around SMEs and SMIs, as we call them, small and medium enterprises and industries. So a lot of these businesses, which are the smaller businesses, over 50% had only up to 4 weeks of a cash buffer. And then you have the private employees, the GLC. GLC is government-linked company staff. MNC is multinational companies. So they did a survey and found that a large portion of the population and businesses, 50% or more, had a cash buffer of less than a month. And the revenue drops were in excess of 50%. There were 2.1 million workers who lost all sources of income during that period. So this is from a total pool of about 15 million workforce. On the next slide, I have an impact on COVID-19 on selected industries in Malaysia. To give you a bit of a big picture of what's happening in different industries. So predictably enough, airlines industry estimated a drop of 14 billion for the year, with passenger demand reduced by nearly 40%. This was what was put out by IATA. And of course, in the same tone, predictably, hotel occupancies are estimated to be 25% or more impacted in the coming months. And I think since then we've seen figures that are projecting even larger vacancy rates. Property sentiment at the time of the survey had only dropped marginally, but we are beginning to see in the industry sentiment is dropped quite a lot as people move their priorities away from owning property to more of a survival mode. And so on. So tourism, loss in crops, and that's because Malaysia is a significant agricultural economy with the plantations. So the closure was affecting them, vehicle sales, retail sales, and so on. Rubber industry was the one that estimated a growth, and that's really because the higher demand close. Some of the other impacts on the next slide. For example, I talked about oil, the impact of oil on Malaysia. And this slide gives you some idea of the total revenues coming out of oil to Malaysia, both directly and indirectly, directly through tax and indirectly through the revenues through the Oil Corporation of Malaysia, Petronas, and the dividends they generate. So while the oil revenue, you'll notice in 2019, the proportion dropped and will continue, it will drop even further for 2020. It is still a significant contributor to government revenue. And it's been estimated that a $1 drop in the price of oil reduces oil revenue to Malaysia by about 100 million Australian dollars, 300 million ringgit. As you know, oil has shown signs of recovery. It's in the mid-30s at the moment, so we continue to watch that space. I've also got a slide on the impact of COVID on different industries on the next slide. And this shows, agriculture, construction, going down all the way to education. And it shows the proportion of Malaysian workers and foreign workers. And one of the reasons this is shown is to show you the impact of the foreign workers, which I touched on earlier. There are 2.1 million registered foreign workers in Malaysia. There's also a significant number of what we call undocumented workers. The number for that is estimated by different bodies at different numbers, the highest of which is up to 4 million. It's generally believed to be 2.5 to 3 million. And they repatriate back home, their remittances back home is a significant amount of money that goes out of the system. Most of these people are working in what we call 3D, dirty, dangerous, and difficult. So that's why the focus you see is construction, agriculture, manufacturing. And then on the next page, we have on the next slide, on some of the forecasts for recovery of different sectors. Now, this is extracted from work done by the Malaysian Stock Exchange and a consulting firm who have done some work for government on this. And it shows you what happened in the first 3 months, which is all drop. And then you can see the flattening in the 2 to 4 months. And then some of their projections and where they see the recovery happening, which is in healthcare, technology, consumer products, and transport and logistics. Although, having said that, the overall market cap change in the businesses that are operating in that space, with the exception of healthcare, are all in the negative territory. You can see that some are projected to have a speedier recovery, while others like construction, real estate, and property, which are the sectors we're in, unfortunately showing slower forecast is slow recovery during this time. Now, in terms of what this will mean to the big picture, Malaysia, on the next slide, we have some of the views about growth Malaysia. Now, historically, the growth in Malaysia has been in the 4 to 6% range. And before COVID, the forecast for 2020 was in that 5% range, 4.5 to 5.5%. Now that's all been obviously reeled back, as has been with many economies. So World Bank has reduced their forecast for Malaysia's GDP growth to negative 0.1%. The IMF said the economy will contract by 1.7%, in other words, minus 1.7. But they forecast a growth rate of 9% next year, which will be the fastest among ASEAN 5 countries, which obviously we look forward to with bated breath. Hope it turns out to be right. BNM is the Malaysian Reserve Bank. Their forecast for 2020 is between -2 and -5, and an independent body, the MIER, have forecast a -1%. And on the next slide, which is really my last slide on this, on the economy, there are various forecasts about whether it'll be a V shape, a U shape, or an L shape, and this is all out there in the crystal ball territory at the moment, crystal ball gazing territory. And the general view is it will be a U shape, and maybe subject to what happens with COVID about any future waves, it could even be a W shape. I have on the next slide some of the views of the government and what some of the government strategies has put out in the public domain now. The Prime Minister has talked about digitalization, and you heard Adil talk about the award of the 5G network, which is carried in today's papers. There's the Minister of Finance has talked about reprioritizing expenditures. There have been there have been some announcements so far, and another announcement is expected later this week. And similarly, the Minister of Trade has talked about digitalization. Now, in terms of Malaysia as an investment destination, on the next slide, I've got a list of some of the incentives available for investment in key sectors. Now, I won't go through each of these. A lot of this information is carried on the MIDA website, which is the Malaysian Industrial Development Authority, which is the authority that is responsible for attracting and placing foreign investors in Malaysia. But some of the industries which Malaysia is looking to foreign investors for investment is in the non-metallic mineral industry, aerospace, food processing, engineering support, pharmaceuticals, technology, oil and gas, and research and development. And each of these have got incentives that are published, and also investors can actually interact with MIDA to see if additional incentives may be possible. So why invest in Malaysia? This is obviously a very difficult time, but it's a difficult time for everyone. But what Malaysia offers is its location in Southeast Asia, strategic location, it's cost competitive, good technologies for manufacturing, and a market-oriented economy with pro-government, pro-business government policies. A lot of investment going into technology. One of the best advanced technologies in this region. And the government continues to drive their technology strategy. Very good infrastructure, amongst the best infrastructure in this region. Human resources is a great asset here. Many of our workforce are educated, productive. A lot of our workforce is educated in Australia. So very good connectivity with Australia. And there are many foreign companies operating here. And one of those foreign companies is the company I work for, Lend-Lease Malaysia. We've been here for over 30 years. We have a development pipeline here of some 4 billion Aussie dollars, 12 billion ringgit or thereabouts, mostly in joint ventures with government and large public listed companies. And we offer the full spectrum of services we offer anywhere else in the world, and especially in our home market of Australia. We've been on a pretty good growth profile in the last few years, for all the reasons that I mentioned to you before. But however, the impact of COVID-19 has meant that we've got to recalibrate our business. So our future pipeline will, we're working through what our new strategy will be. That will drive our pipeline for the future. But we continue to explore opportunities. It's one of the 4 Asian markets we're active in. The others being China, Japan, and Singapore. And finally, MABC. We've been operating here since 1986. Our patrons are the Malaysian Minister of International Trade and Industry and the Australian High Commissioner to Malaysia. We are an effective body to support your business interests. We have a full program of events throughout the year. We provide a platform to introduce businesses to key figures. We match businesses. We do regular news briefings. We have good access and pricing to our events for our members. We have lots of networking events, which unfortunately has now got to operate by webinars like this, as opposed to face-to-face. We provide a platform for advocacy and access to government departments in Malaysia and Australia. We do a lot of networking, as I said. And we also have a regular newsletter. We have a full-time secretariat and are available to meet your needs when you want to come and talk to, when you want to come and do business in Malaysia. So with that, I think I've slightly exceeded my time. Thank you very much. I'll now hand on to Chau, who will take you on through the next piece.
Dinesh, that was very, very useful information. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. As Ashley earlier introduced, my name is Chau. I'm the president of the AusCham ASEAN and also a director on AusCham Vietnam's board. It's my pleasure to be joining this webinar today. So thank you to DFAT, to Austrade and to MABC for letting us take part in this webinar. Firstly, a little bit about AusCham ASEAN. We were launched in 2017, and AusCham ASEAN is a chamber of chambers. We have 9 foundation members that are listed here on the screen, you can see, and together we represent more than 2,000 Australian corporate businesses across the region. We work very closely with our foundation members to provide a united voice across the region. Our mission is informing Australian businesses on regional integration developments and the business with a particular focus on the annual business survey, which I will go to as the main part of my presentation today. Secondly, in explaining the contribution of Australian businesses to ASEAN markets. And finally, advocating the policies, rules and regulations that support Australian business activities in ASEAN. This is including organising sector roundtables in key areas of interest for Australian businesses. So, the survey. So as I mentioned earlier, AusCham ASEAN, this is actually our 5th launch of our annual Australian Business in ASEAN Survey 2020. This survey was originally scheduled to be launched in February this year, but we've taken the decision to delay it and overlay the preliminary COVID-19. This was undertaken by a lot of those that took part in the survey in the first week of April, given the significant impact, as you've heard, to all of our businesses around the region. 248 Australian businesses undertook the broader survey, while a larger than expected number of 333 Australian businesses across ASEAN undertook this impact of COVID survey just within 7 days. So the results. So my purpose today is actually to talk through, give you a briefing on what the survey tells us. So pre-COVID, if we published this survey in February, the results would have shown that Australian business sentiments with respect to ASEAN was buoyant, with continued confidence in ASEAN and a strong desire to expand their contribution to the region through increased trade and investment. More than 80% plan to expand their investment and trade over the next 5 years, although perceptions on corruption remains the greatest challenge to operating in this region. Also, lack of access to skilled labour was cited to be 36% of those participating in the survey, providing a substantial opportunity for Australian firms to help address this skills deficit. Almost 4 in every 5 of those surveyed believe that ASEAN was a priority region for their company. A proportion of the respondents who believe that ASEAN integration is important for doing business in the region continues to increase. It's now up 47%, up from 41% in 2017. A majority of businesses continues to report needing further information on the progress and impacts of the ASEAN economic community. And significantly, only 10% can confidently say that they have a detailed understanding of what ASEAN integration means to their business. Another factor is enforcement of laws were viewed to be a priority in acceleration of ASEAN integration, overtaking but closely followed by the reduction of investments and service restrictions. Fixing infrastructure gaps across the region and also improving labour mobility are the next most important priorities for Australian business in ASEAN. However, post-COVID, and you've heard a lot from Adil and Dinesh about all of this, many businesses are now, as we know, are in survival mode. As revenue disappears, supply chains are closed down, and the need to work remotely becomes mandatory across ASEAN and Australia. So unsurprisingly, 86% of Australian firms in ASEAN that participated concluded or let us know that the COVID-19 will, so this, take note that this was done early April, so we're now June, 2 months past, but they anticipated that it will have a negative impact on their business, with more than half expecting the impact would be strongly negative. 3 of the greatest impacts to date have been shown through this survey to be the loss of customers due to the impact of the business environment, this being the single biggest negative factor. Business productivity when implementing working from home arrangements. 59% of businesses estimate that it has negative impact on their business productivity and disruption to logistics and supply chain caused by the pandemic. So now looking at the impact of COVID-19 on Australian businesses in ASEAN, just a little bit more detail. So here you see the diverse nature of Australian businesses across ASEAN. The response to this additional survey were broadly represented by a wider business community, with the industries represented roughly similar to the general survey. Just so you know, this will be available, so if I'm just skipping through the slides, you'll be able to get a copy of this later. So unsurprisingly, the majority of firms anticipated the pandemic would have a negative impact in their business. So like indicated earlier, 48% expecting it to be strongly negative. Some businesses were anticipating some upsides actually as a result of the pandemic, and 6% anticipating strong positive impacts and somewhat positive outcome for their business due to COVID. Here, working from home is One of the biggest impacts that people feel that impact in their business. 77% of firms implemented working from home protocols, with 61% having lost customers and revenue due to change of business climate, and the majority of firms have been impacted by logistical difficulties. But importantly, if I can go to, all these will be demonstrated in the survey outcome, but not to bore you. So implementing working from home arrangements. As you can see here, more than 1/4 of firms have all of their staff working from home during the early stage of the pandemic, with only 14% unable to implement working from home protocols. And what that does is, although it helps the firms continue to operate, as you can see there, a high percentage of over 43% see that the productivity has decreased. And I think that would change now that we are all used to the working from home. So eventually when this survey is going to be taken again, it will probably show a different outcome. And then here, only 18% of firms have withdrawn staff from the region due to COVID. So now, just going specific to results for Malaysia. Almost half of the firms, 45%, operating in the Malaysian market were much more profitable in 2019 compared to 2018, and with only 15% of those reporting a decline in profitability. So I think this ties to, so take COVID aside, but it tells a lot about the opportunities as well as the competitiveness of investments into Malaysia. This is actually an improvement in on 2018, with a mixed year of Australian businesses in communities in Malaysia, with 37% of the firms reporting improved profitability and a further 30% reporting declining profits in 2018. So reasons as to, or issues as to investing into Malaysia: government bureaucracy, access to skilled labour, unfair business practices continue to be the three most reported high impact business challenges in Malaysia. And you've heard this and you've seen, actually Dinesh and Adil has mentioned this in their slides. And although each were reported by a smaller portion than the two previous years, they remain to be the three most affected. Hopefully, you'll be able to access this survey. So hopefully if there's any questions about what the survey is about, how did we come about these results, please contact us. There's our link, and thank you again for the opportunity of presenting the survey outcome. Ashley, back to you.
Well, thank you all very much, Adil, Dinesh and Chau. Very informative insights and certainly relevant, given, as I mentioned before, that Malaysia is South Australia's second largest goods export destination in the world. So thank you again. I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm hoping that you can stay on just for a little bit longer, because we'd love to ask our presenters some questions. I have got a couple on file here already, and of course you can submit your own questions through the Q&A function to the side of your screen. So please stay on. If you do need to go, please don't hesitate to perhaps email me and I can get you in touch with the presenters. Ashley, ashleigh.ridley, RIDLEY @sa.gov.au. And as I said, I can connect you if you do need to depart. First up, I'm going to throw this question to you, Adil. Mark Kosned's joined the webinar, so it's great to see you again, Mark. Is wine tariff free, or are there other levies and tariffs not captured by the FTA?
For the question, Mark. So unfortunately, wine, there's an import duty tax per litre, depending on the tariff codes of the product. So it can differ from wine, different type of wines, for example, rice wines, grape must, or as well even wine fruits other than grapes as well. So they all carry a different kind of import duty tax as well, excise duty tax and sales tax, unfortunately.
Thanks, Adil. That's great. Dinesh, have you got some key advice for existing or new South Australian businesses that are currently operating or want to operate in Malaysia? I suppose we're referring to the current market situation.
So I take it that we're talking about the property development.
Yes.
Industry, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I think the market here, it's at this point in time, it's a wait and see market, because the results of what the impact of what COVID-19 is doing is we haven't really seen it through yet. So my advice is to at this point is to understand the market, and also to engage with Malaysian companies here, because property in particular, I think the best advice I can give you, which is similar to the way we've operated, is it's always good to work in joint venture with the locals, because of the whole process of acquiring land, converting land, change of use of land. It's a very locally driven thing. So we tend to work in joint venture with Malaysian entities. So that's the two things. One is, my advice would be to work with somebody local. And two is to probably spend the next few months as we figure out the market, understanding the market a bit better.
Yeah. And just to follow on from that, Dinesh, do you currently have any projects or lend-to-lease projects in Malaysia that SA Business can partner with?
That's possible. Businesses can come and see us. We do have a pipeline of work that's going on at this point in time. So there are various opportunities in services, in trades, etc., that we'd be happy to talk to them.
Wonderful. Fantastic. We can always connect any interests with you. So keep an eye out on that. Chau, being the director of AusCham Vietnam with experience in the Vietnamese market, what are the key trends to look out for in that particular market? Is now a good time to enter for new exporters?
Yes, I think now is the time. If any time, not the time. Vietnam has been preparing itself in the last probably 10 years, where you see the economy, the government opening up in terms of policies, working at changing regulations such that foreign investors coming in would be having a better ease into the business. And so right now, in terms of sector, I think a lot very similar to the rest of Southeast Asia and ASEAN economies, is that Vietnam is emerging or actually developing. So you have the manufacturing business that is now becoming much more high tech in terms of focuses on. So you have right now, if you've been reading, so you've got the likes of Apple that are looking to China Plus One to come into Vietnam to set up their manufacturing plants, as well as automotives, car manufacturers from Thailand are looking to move to Vietnam. So I think in Vietnam, and what Dinesh is saying in terms of coming in and doing a joint venture, that's still very common in all Asian countries, where you've got a lot of land, not issues, but a lot of understanding to do with land. So to hold title would be something that is quite difficult for a foreigner. So to come in, first off, is to get yourself wet on the ground, rather than just coming in and going out. What you literally have to be here to feel and to know how and what to do, and reaching out to the likes of MABC. So you've got the AusCham Vietnam, you've got the chambers, you've got the DFAT to get the needed information on how to get in the best way.
Wow, that's great. And I think we've got one more question. Adil, perhaps this one that you can help with. Noting that the food services sector is badly impacted during the partial lockdown period, what would be the top 3 priorities for the coming 6 months for the F&B industries in the hotel and hospitality industry?
Actually, so the sector is really badly impacted. About 20% of hotels are already closed, and in the HoReCa sector as well, about 8. They are only operating between 20 to 80% right now. So the 3 main priorities would be they would want to focus on hygiene preparation for the foods. They also would like to focus on relooking at their menus to offer, because right now a lot of people are still doing takeaways, so they're going to reduce their menu to a shorter one, and which is easy for takeaways, and they will go into digital for promotions. So those are the 3 key main priorities that I've heard from the recent webinars over here. Thank you.
That's great. Now, any last minute questions? There's none here at the moment. So other than that, I think we'll be closing off. I think we've gone well over time. So thank you for taking the time out to come on onto the webinar today. Please do take the time to complete our short poll that's now on screen. We do appreciate your feedback, and there's also a free text box if you'd like to ask any follow-up questions, or you might like to connect with one of our presenters. Happy to forward that through. A huge thanks to our presenters again, Adil, Dinesh and Chau. I'm sure everyone would agree there was some very valuable information provided over the course of this webinar. And lastly, I hope you can join us tomorrow, 4th of June at 11:30 a.m. South Australian time for our India Global In-Market webinar delivered in partnership with Austrade India. So we've got a couple of presenters, education focused, and Sunbeam Ventures Managing Director will be on to provide a bit of an update on the food sector. So it should be really interesting. And I did say 11:30, I meant 2 o'clock. Sorry about that. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you here online again soon.